Color Radio. It's the channel in the know. All around Cleveland town, we'll be proud, bringing the hit tunes. Here is Color Radio on wonderful WHK.
Starting to spin at +1/4. Veering at 17.17. Your baby, over and out.
Time for Color Radio on wonderful WHK.
Howdy doody, little stinkers, and welcome to my Thursday night land of the Winky Blinkers. My gravy's pretty hot. Yeah, you can hear it flow. So welcome to another show.
Sit your dandy peachy keen, moving right along, and it's 11:19. 11 minutes are left to go before we close up the Monday show. Mad Daddy with you, frantic chums. You know it is the official show. You can tell by the sound of them drums. 10-10 on anybody's dial with solid gold from back a little.
Hi, this is Mike Olszewski. I'm the author of Mad Daddy, Myers, Mintz, and the Moondog, and how Cleveland, Ohio changed rock radio. And you're listening to Kicksville Radio.
Hey there, Kicksville listeners. We've got a real treat for you tonight. We are going to be speaking with none other than Mike Olszewski. Did I say that right, Mike?
Hey, close enough.
Okay. There's a lot of Z's and S's in there. Why not? You're from Cleveland. Okay. The author of Mad Daddy, Myers, Mintz, and the Moondog, and how Cleveland, Ohio changed rock radio. We are so excited about this. Mike has been working on this book for eons. I tell you, eons. And he's been talking a little bit about it coming out very soon. It's just a short ways away from here, but we are the first radio station here at Kicksville Radio to be able to bring you all the scoops and sneak peeks that Mike has to offer on the Mad Daddy, our great radio hero, among a couple of others from the Cleveland, Ohio area. Hello, how are you doing, Mike?
What an honor it is to be on with you, Miriam. Thanks so much for having us on. And you know what? If Mad Daddy were here today, he would have been able to look back and say, see, I was right all along.
Absolutely, sure was. Tell us about the book. Tell us when you started on this. We're going to go back into your own personal history with radio history and radio in general and television as well in the Cleveland area. You're a Kent Stater like me. I appreciate that. But you really know your stuff when it comes to the radio towers beaming all the good stuff out there. So tell us a little bit about how this particular project came into your realm and how you started working on it.
Well, you know, it's funny because when I was at WERE Radio, where Bill Randall came from back in the 1950s, I was there in the 70s and 80s, and a guy called me up. I had done a piece about famous radio disc jockeys, and he said, hey, you forgot the greatest one of all. I said, who's this? He sent over this reel with Mad Daddy, Pete Myers. I could not believe what I heard. Nobody could believe what they heard. And remember, this is before the internet and YouTube and things like that. So I heard this, and I wanted to find out more about this. Well, I had done a lot of radio. I ended up at WMMS for a long time, and later went on to TV. Still fascinated. Why don't we ever hear anything about this guy, Mad Daddy? Well, fortunately, I decided that it was time for a career change. I wasn't crazy about the way the commercial radio was going. I thought, I think I'd like to teach. So I got to teaching at Kent State University, but I needed a master's degree, and I thought, what better project would be to actually find out more about Pete Mad Daddy Myers. Now, you are a Kent alum, and you may remember this guy. His name was Bob West. Now, Bob was one of the profs there. He was a fascinating man. He worked with Jack Kerouac. He knew Cool Herc. He even knew Cool Herc, the guy that helped start rapping hip-hop. And he was in his 80s. And he and I taught rap and hip-hop together. He was amazing.
Wow.
And, he was an old beat poet. Like I said, he worked with Kerouac and all these people. And I remember I did my master's thesis on Pete Myers. We were lucky enough to catch so many of these guys, at least 4 or 5 of them, before they died. And I did my dissertation. And I remember they record everything with the dissertation, by the way. And he looked over at me and he said, I knew Pete Myers. I didn't like him. And I said, oh, crap. And they stopped it and they said, you do realize that the first 2 words of your dissertation or your defense are, oh, crap. Let's start over, but watch what you say. But at any rate, we found out that even though Pete Myers was never as popular as he should have been, we found some fascinating things about him. And my wife Janice is my co-author. And we tracked down a lot of interesting information about him. You know what's interesting, too, is we kind of put his career parallel to Alan Freed. Now, both guys came up through Akron. Both were on WJW for a time. Both went on to New York. And both played gut bucket music and blues and rhythm and blues and things like that. The interesting thing was, Alan Freed was really, they were both helping break down social barriers with black music. Keep in mind that back in the 1950s, America's looking for something to unite us like we did during World War II. However, it was really super conservative. If you were a white Protestant male, you had the world ahead of you. After that, you're swimming upstream. So you had these guys here who were, presenting this music, and in racist America, and let's call it what it is back then, quite honestly, you had all kinds of problems. You know, they were saying, well, we've got flying saucers, we've got radiation, we've got spies, we've got, Betty Page. All these people are threatening the American life. But rhythm and blues music was the devil that came into your kid's bedroom and was sleeping under the pillow every night. So they came after Alan Freed only because, because he defied so many people. Pete Myers did it in a funnier way, but he helped break down a lot of barriers as well.
And how did they cross over?
It's funny because the crossover was one of the other. We actually look at a third person in this. Now, it's primarily a biography of Pete Myers, but one of the guys you got to look at is Leo Mintz. Mm-hmm. Now, Leo Mintz had a record store, had several record stores in Cleveland called Record Rendezvous. And by all means, he was the guy that said, these kids are rocking and rolling in the aisles. And the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame does recognize that Leo Mintz was using that for the popular music. But he was sort of like the bond between these two guys. He was their sponsor on WJW, WHK. He was handing them records, and he was the one that was encouraging them to say, look, we have to break down these barriers. I got white and black kids dancing in my store, and they're all getting along very well, and music is unifying them. So Leo Mintz was sort of the guy that really kind of brought them into more prominence, certainly into one of the biggest radio markets at the time, Cleveland, Ohio, and they stepped up and went on to New York.
Fabulous. So tell us about Mad Daddy, about Pierre Myers, and where he came from, how he came up, how he started in radio, and what his whole shebang was, because he was way out and so influential.
Well, was he ever? He had a brother named Ernie Myers, who we were very lucky to have talked to before that. By the way, excuse me, we have chiming clocks all over my house, so it's like you're in Notre Dame Cathedral at the top of the hour.
Yeah.
But at any rate, he had a brother named Ernie. Now, Pete Myers was always interested in theater, even when he was a kid. And he was always doing crazy stuff, too. One day he stole a bulldozer and drove it down Hollywood Boulevard. He was a kid. But his brother Ernie said that what the most amazing thing about him was he was always challenging himself. When he went to the London Academy of the Arts, he had these wild ideas about what theater should be and how to act, and they weren't exactly along with the very staid and traditional ways of acting that they taught at the London Academy. However, he was actually on Armed Forces Radio for a time. And when he was on Armed Forces Radio in the Middle East, he was fascinated, by the way, with the Eastern culture. He loved Middle Eastern culture. And it was with him all his life. And at any rate, he was on the radio, Armed Forces Radio, and he starts talking about a huge dinosaur that the nuclear bombs had created. And this is before Godzilla, by the way. So,
wow.
He might have even had a good argument that he started the Godzilla craze. At any rate, he was talking about this massive dinosaur that was now coming down the shores in Tokyo.
Oh, wow.
One of the guys who heard that broadcast was General Douglas MacArthur. And he said, this man is an idiot. Get him off the air.
This man is dangerous.
Yeah.
I love a good practical joke. You know, this whole thing started when my crazy buddy Melvin hooked a smoke bomb to my car. Bluey. Boy, I love a good practical joke. So after I pick up the hood of the car and throw it in the trunk, I whip over to the post office to drop off the package for Melvin. Boy, what a package. Took me 3 hours to get the Excelsior wadded in just right so you wouldn't know there was a live cobra inside. Boy, was he surprised. I love a good practical joke. Next day, I hear from Melvin with a bang. I guess he was pretty sore about that snake because in the middle of the night, he paints out the white line on the road that goes past my house. And he paints another one right up my driveway through the living room, and pow! I hear this big noise, and there's this diesel truck roaring through my backyard wearing my bathtub for a radiator cap. I love a good practical joke. And you know, Melvin's nuts about golf. So I sneak over to where he plays, and I grab his golf bag out of the locker. Get this, I cut holes in all the balls, and I hollow them out, and I fill them up with nitroglycerin, boy! What a drive! Pow! All of a sudden, from hole 1 to 18, one big sand trap. But I didn't stay one up on old Melvin long, boy. Oh, what a mad cat he is. He gets this lion out of the zoo, and he shaves off all the mane, and he chains it up out and back to Rover's house. Lucky I caught the gag before the lion caught me. Too bad about the mailman, though. I love a good practical joke. You know, Melvin uses an electric razor, and here I am hooking high-tension wires from the third rail on the train tracks that run by where he lives. When he comes home to shave with 6,000 volts, boy, will he be burning. Hey, what's that green smoky stuff coming in under the door? Poison gas! Man, that Melvin's done it again. Man, I love a good practical joke.
Well, then he came back to the United States, tried to get into a lot of different acting, and believe it or not, we know he was on Playhouse 90. He was doing a lot of bit parts. However, we only found one recording of him where he is actually listed in the credits, and it was with Roger Moore, and it was in a Hallmark Hall of Fame production called The Clay of Kings. We have only found one print of that, and it's at the, but it is being preserved at the UCLA Film Archives. But he did try to get into acting. Couldn't do it. So his brother said, well, you know, the radio is pretty good. You might enjoy that. He got into radio, got to Akron, which was one step away from Cleveland, which, as far as he was concerned, was one step away from New York City. And he developed the Mad Daddy character in Akron through a lot of influences, too. Mad Magazine, Famous Monsters of Filmland, some of the crazy records that were coming out at that time. Also, a guy that your listeners might remember, a guy named Basil Wolverton, was an artist who actually came up with a character called Powerhouse Pepper and another one called Scoop Scuttle. And Scoop Scuttle is very much like Mad Daddy. So he kind of based them on a lot of different characters and came up with a very unique character, the Mad Daddy.
Outrageous. Fantastic. Go ahead. What happened then? Cleveland, Ohio.
Well, he left Akron, went to Cleveland, and when he was at WHK, or I should say WJW first, he had a huge following, and people loved the Mad Daddy. And he would get on the air, and what he would do is he would come on as lovable, laughable Pete Myers, who was just a typical sort of like radio announcer at that time. But then he would go to dinner. Dinner was usually a couple of martinis. And he'd come back and bang, he says, Gothic Beatnik, the Mad Daddy, talking 100 miles an hour, talking from, doing Zoomerating, which is on YouTube, which is amazing, making up words from Z to A backwards. And I talked to his producer, Pete, his name was, oh my gosh, Pat, I'm sorry, McIntyre. And he told me, he said, he doesn't remember him ever saying the same word twice, and he would make up these words. And it was just remarkable because talking about Neil McIntyre, when Neil told us that he just loved Mad Daddy, and he just went out to the transmitter site, found the transmitter site, knocked on the door, and a guy in a tweed suit came to the door and said, "Can I help you?" He says, "Yeah, I'd like to help out with the Mad Daddy show." He says, "Well, maybe you need some help. Come on in." So he said, "Here's what you do. Just answer the phone. Keep answering the phone. Just take down the names of the people. What do they want to hear? Just take their names. Don't put anything else on there, and then bring them into the studio." He didn't realize he was talking to the Mad Daddy.
Wow.
And the Mad Daddy would turn on and off like a switch. And he said he would just hand him these dedications. He would make up rhymes at the top, off the top of his head. A remarkable performer.
Oh, yeah.
Well, what happened is, he had an opportunity at WHK. And WHK was one step away from New York because they were in the Metro media stations. And he got into WHK. There was a little problem. He had a non-compete contract. He had to be off the air for 90 days.
Oh.
And he thought, oh, no, well, they remember me in 90 days. So maybe one of the all-time greatest and possibly the most foolish promotions ever. He went to he actually went to the FAA, and he said, "Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to fill Lake Erie with green Jell-O." And they said, "Yeah, okay." He said, "Then I'm going to jump out, and I'm going to jump out of a plane." And they said, "No, you're not going to jump out of a plane." They said, "Lake Erie is by far and away the most dangerous lake to jump over." So just to prove it, they brought in a parachute club. They said, "Have you ever jumped out of a plane?" They said, "Sure, lots of times in the service." It was once. And they said, "You have a 50-50 chance of survival if you are actually, an experienced jumper." And he said, "Yeah, I can do it, no problem." It was dangerous. He went up in the air. They would not let him wear his cape because that would have tangled in with his chute. He jumped out, and as he was going down, he threw out these slips with to go to Record Rendezvous to get the new Zorro record that was out. It was the theme song from Zorro. Oh, by the way, they didn't let him put the Jell-O in Lake Erie, but he did survive, and he was quite a character. He was a foolhardy thing to do, but it got him a lot of attention. Finally, he ends up on WHK, and in a nutshell, he's a sensation on WHK, and he would always do Zoomerating from Z to A, so he could say at the end, "You're listening to WHK," because it rhymed with A. And he got his big break. He went to New York, and I remember talking to some of the people that said they had heard the final broadcast, and they said, "No, it can't be." And there was a huge crowd outside the studios of WHK on East 55th in Euclid, which at that time was not a really good part of town. Didn't matter. A huge crowd showed up. He came out with his cape on, waved goodbye, jumped in his pink Cadillac, and zoomed away.
What is a Fisteris? Well, Fisterises are everywhere and come in all shapes and sizes. Big as a Grendel, tiny as a Sussman, and sometimes just middle-sized, like Fremeses nibbling on the tees. You find them on race rundles just before the sun goes down, or on the wayside in the rain when the single-fingle makes its rounds. In crowded wrinkle turns in the wee hours of the morning when no one feels very energetic and the man at the piano plays songs you haven't heard since Septumbulance. Fisteris is like pretty girls named Ingeborg with silver shoopers in their hair and banjo strings, moonlight gallops to the off and on. Yeah, they laugh a lot and send funny picture postcards in the Gelfening and play canasta with the Rodenstocks when the weather's bad. And sometimes Fisterises are sad and sit and mope about the Limrocks and the snurds they loved and lost, or cry big teetle-doodles and sob until you'd think their hearts would break into a million tiny crevices. Fisterises' dislike Alpenstons with yellow teeth who step on people's feet in crowded subways, and old wet newspapers with pictures of the winning turtle blurred, and artichokes for breakfast when the bumblebugger's gone. Fisteruses are laughter when the rim runs slightly off the zelf, and tears when shiring Bendel's sad and comes around no more. And music to your ears trancing dwindled down so you hear the darlings dropping one by one. Well, cynical people and those who've lost their faith in things they never see may curl their lips and call Fisteruses a useless lot and hardly worth a mentioning. But me, well, gee, when I go home at night feeling low and beat out and out of sorts with life and reach for my pipe and slip out of my shoes and unscrew my little wooden head, I don't know, I hear a little sound and I know my own Fisterus is there. And I lean over in my easy chair and pat its little thermothrottle and my Fisterus smiles back at me. Well, sometimes I forget that, of course, they hardly ever talk. And I say to my Fisterus, I'll get off in the shit so you'd ever see them there stick out shooting in to sit that's healthy. Well, now you know how I feel about Fisteruses. But if you're confused, it's your own fault, you know. Because,
Well, he went to New York, and he was the Mad Daddy for one night. Unfortunately, it was a music of your life station with lots of Sinatra, Pat Boone, Tony Bennett. You know, there was an audience for that, but not for Mad Daddy on that station. They brought him in the next day. They said, "Well, your show broke the phones. We couldn't keep up with all the calls. They want you off the air."
Oh man!
And he said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "We hired this we hired Pete Myers, not this Mad Daddy. Forget it. No Mad Daddy." He tried to keep Mad Daddy going for a few years, even at other stations. It didn't work. To bring this story to an end, he was also watching Alan Freed. Now, Freed was doing quite well, but also having problems because he was promoting breaking down racial barriers very publicly. And as a result, they came after him. They got him with the IRS, similar to the way they got Al Capone with the Untouchables. But the thing was, he probably would have escaped that because he was doing what every other disc jockey was doing as far as payola was concerned. However, the racial aspect came in. We had to stop him.
Yep.
So, But at any rate, what happened was in 1968, he had been in New York for 10 years. And Mad Daddy just wasn't happening. And he got a call to come back to Cleveland, the Cleveland Arena, home of the first rock and roll concert. And they asked Daddy to come in and just to introduce some acts. They had a bunch of old acts in 1968 with the Chiffons and Fats Domino and Chuck Berry. And a lot of people weren't listening to anymore because you had progressive rock going on, like that. So they said, we've got this act, we've got 6 acts. I think it cost $3,000 to get all 6 of them, including Chuck Berry and Fats Domino. And they said, we're going to ask all these old disc jockeys to come out and introduce, some of the acts. Would you do it? He said, all right, I'll do it one last time. He said, I'll come back to Cleveland. He said, don't even give me a room. Just take me back to the airport when it's over. He came out thinking he was going to do just one introduction as the Mad Daddy. The place exploded. All the other jocks came up to him and said, we're not going on after that. We're here to see Mad Daddy. And he said, no, you got paid. We'll all go up there together. So he came out with each jock, Joe Finan, Jim LaBarbera, some of the folks like that. And the place went nuts.
Wow, beautiful.
This is where it turns tragic. I spoke to his brother Ernie. Obviously, he had some physical problems. It was shortly before his death, but he told me that when he went back to New York, he was told that they were going to change his the time of the show. They'd given him a new shift. It was a later shift, and he didn't want that shift. And he realized that everything he wanted, he left in Cleveland years before, and he committed suicide. It's funny because when I was speaking to Neil McIntyre, he said he thought it was Harry Carey. He thought that he was so very much entrenched in the tradition, the Eastern tradition, that he just thought it's more honorable to die than to live the way I am.
Wow.
Johnny Holiday, an old jock from when I was a kid, I spoke to him, and he's been very helpful. He said, keep this in mind. He said, if Pete Myers was alive today, he'd be very old, too, don't get me wrong. But he said if he would have brought that act today, he would have owned cable radio. He would have owned Sirius XM.
Wow.
So-
Wow. So October 1968 was the last day?
The last appearance on stage for him. And, the great thing is we have wonderful newspapers in Cleveland, I should say wonderful archives and wonderful libraries. And, when we started digging around for photos, and believe it or not, I actually stumbled upon some photos in Columbus. There's somebody that bought the old Cleveland Press archives, or 1/3 of the Cleveland Press archives, and she was selling the pictures, 8x10s for $1 a piece.
Wow.
So we were able to find some photos there, found some wonderful photos with the Cleveland Press archives at Cleveland State University and also the Cleveland Public Library. I think when this book comes out, people are going to put it down and say, wow, that's all. I mean, it's just an amazing story about some people that learned how to market music and at the same time, we're actually, besides giving the kids what they wanted, breaking down racial barriers.
Right. I mean, they did so much, and we have to honor Cleveland for this too. What is it? The water, Jello or not? It's that wonderful Lake Erie water.
That's it, exactly.
But he had such a personality too that it really appealed to young people and us older young people now too. With the whole ghoulish kind of motif and so on, and that cackling, and you're right, the Mad Magazine kind of a deal with it's the moldy basement and and the razor, ow, So
that's an amazing thing, though. You bring up an important point because when I was speaking to Neil McIntyre, and Neil said that he was very, very quiet, and everybody told me this. An old disc jockey named Carl Reese, he said he knew him for years, never had a meaningful conversation with him. Johnny Holiday said he doubts that any conversation he ever had with him he says it was always pleasant, but he was very quiet. He doubts it lasted more than 10 minutes.
Wow.
And Neil McIntyre said, and Neil was as close probably as anybody outside his family, he said they once had a 4-hour layover between appearances. And he said this guy was so quiet, he said they had a 4-hour layover, so they went to a bar. And he said in that 4 hours, he doesn't remember having a conversation.
Oh my
He said it was
God.
just casual stuff.
Wow.
It's like, would you like another one? These pretzels are good. Things like that. That was it.
Wow. And so many different aspects of his personality went on for other people who were in radio and TV in Cleveland. Isn't that correct? With Ghoulardi and the Ghoul and everybody that came after that, they were inspired by his humor and his craziness, correct?
It's funny you mention that because when he was on WHK, he did 2 hours as lovable, laughable Pete Myers. Then he took off for an hour to go have, dinner. They poured him dinner. And then he'd come back and bang, he's the Mad Daddy. The guy that was his newsman, who was on for that hour, was Ernie Anderson, who
yeah.
became Ghoulardi. Now, the interesting thing about that was, and as you know, I'm preaching to the choir when I'm speaking to you about this, Ernie Anderson was Ghoulardi. There was only one Ghoulardi.
Yep.
However, if you listen to some of the old recordings, like the Norton Records collection, which is excellent.
Oh, yeah, it's so good.
If you listen to that, you hear some of the things like where he's talking about AMRAP, a city in Cleveland called, a suburb in Cleveland called Parma, that he would say backwards. And some of the things that he picked from Mad Daddy that he also used on TV. I'm talking about Ernie Anderson, of course.
Yeah.
Here's another interesting thing, too. He was well ahead of his time, Pete Myers, because he wanted the Mad Daddy to be on TV. And he was, for 1 month. And he just thought that it was too difficult to do TV. Well, I spoke to a cameraman who was a young man then, but he, was retired now. He said, yeah, he remembers very well when he came in. He said the first thing that he did was, he said, I need you to hang the camera upside down so it looks like I'm upside down. Those
Wow.
cameras weighed 800 pounds.
Tall order.
And he said, no, we can't do that. And he said, I'll tell you what, if you can get 3 guys here that can even move that camera, we'll try it. And of course they couldn't. So what Myers did was he hung upside down. But you can't do that very long.
No, my goodness.
But
Wow.
he was actually on WXEL TV, which later became WJW in Cleveland. He was on for about a month, and he said, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. You just keep it. So I'm sticking to radio. Oddly enough, that TV show boomed over Lake Erie into Toronto. And
Wow.
you could pick up that station over the air. And one of the guys that I spoke to, who I'm sure you've probably met over the years, is a guy named Jay Hunt.
Sure.
And Jay knows more about Mad Daddy than just about anybody.
Oh,
and he
yes.
lives in Canada.
That's right. And that's where he was hearing it.
Yeah, exactly. And, yeah, hearing
And seeing it.
sure.
And seeing it.
Yeah.
Wow, amazing, amazing. Now, I think we're going to have a little bit of an expose here, for the record enthusiasts, and we have a few who tune in now and then, about the Mad Daddy, because we knew about the Fisteris record, and that's magnificent and excellent, but you made quite a revelation that's going to have everybody scrambling to go find these records. Tell us about Hugh Masker and Lord Did and the didn'ts
exactly.
or
No,
the don'ts. Who are they?
I suspect that that Lord Did and the Didn'ts is based on Dickie doing the don'ts.
Absolutely.
But I'll say this: I'm very blessed to work with a fine researcher, and that's my wife Janice, who's my co-author.
Yay, Janice!
And as we were digging through the papers, yes, and we're digging through broadcast magazines and things like that, we found out that Mad Daddy was actually responsible for 2 other 45s. Now, one of them, and I'm looking, as you mentioned, it was called, oh my gosh, the Lord...
Operations Decoy by Hugh Masker?
That's it, Operation Decoy by Hugh Masher. And it was about New York policemen dressing as women and trying to, get guys that were attacking them and mugging them and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was called Operation Decoy. And then there was another one that he did as Lord Did and the Didn'ts. And that was on Laurie Records. And what's fascinating is that you're finding out about these things so many years later. And, the song was called Gunga Didn't, backed with Morris Code on Mr. Peacock Records. These were local labels, not Laurie, but certainly Mr. Peacock.
Yeah, oh.
And then you see Lord Did and the Dents, and here it's a Pete Myers record that we weren't aware of. And Operations Decoy was on Laurie Records. And once again, there's some speculation that it's Myers himself. And if you listen to it, you'd think, yeah, the guy that wrote it probably sang it. It sounds a lot like him.
Oh, man. This is so exciting. Let's listen to them.
I was taken by surprise by a pair of girlish eyes while strolling through the park last night. I fell in love with Officer Murphy, the cop up in Central Park. In his tangerine stretch pants, Officer Murphy looked ravishing in the dark. With his polka dot blouse and open-toed sandals, he had a perfect disguise. A curly blonde wig and mascara lashes set off his baby blue eyes. I said, honey, what's your name? He said, my name is Madge. He had the handcuffs ready and he showed his badge. I heard a whistle blow, I heard a siren wail, and we strolled arm in arm to jail. I didn't know it was Officer Murphy. He looked as cute as can be. In his tangerine stretch pants, Officer Murphy was Sophia Loren to me. He had a beaded bag, a bracelet full of charms. He said he couldn't wait to get me in his arms, and then he captured me with his great big smile. And now I'm downtown awaiting trial. Oh, here in my cell is a picture of Murphy. The sight of him makes my heart stop. In his tangerine stretch pants, Hollywood glasses, Minx trim nightstick, shocking pink pistol. He was such an adorable cop.
The saga of Gunga Din. Let us relive that thrilling moment. The enemy troops waiting in ambush, his fellow troopers approaching the fatal trap. Our faithful native bugle boy realizes all too well that sounding the call to arms may mean certain death. Summoning his courage and in defiance of danger, he raises his trusty bugle to his lips. Though I've belted you and flayed you, by the living God that made you, you're a better man than I am, Gunga Din.
Man, great stuff. Unbelievable. We're so excited. This was definitely trick or treat, and we got the treats on this. Okay, let's hear some more. Let's hear a little bit about you, Mike. What the heck have you been up to? You've been writing like nonstop for the past many, many decades at this point. Tell us how you started. I mean, I know that you were, as you said, a person who was going in for your master's degree and wanting to write and do your thesis on the Mad Daddy and so on, but where did these other books come from? You know, Radio Days and so on.
Oh, yeah, it's funny because, you know, I got into broadcasting in the 70s, and quite honestly, and probably later than I should have because I was too busy trying to be a hippie, but that didn't work out quite the way I wanted.
Good.
But at any rate, we saw so much of that history of broadcasting because I'm part of the first TV generation. I mean, when I was born in the 50s, and my parents would put me in front of a TV, turn it on, I'd watch it, the fine-tuning signal, or whatever they call it, that station thing they put out with the Indian.
Right.
And I would watch that, and the test pattern, that was it.
Yes.
And I would watch the test pattern, watch these shows, and I took in everything. And plus, when I finally got into broadcasting, knowing that there was a lot of history, I got to work with a lot of the guys that were around back then, too. I mean, some of the most remarkable people. And we would hear these crazy stories from guys like Lynn Sheldon, who played Barnaby, the kid show host, and so many others. And we'd hear these wonderful stories, and we're thinking, wait a minute. You know, it's great to know that WEWS went on the air, Channel 5 in Cleveland went on the air in 1947. But it was literally like making sausage. It was almost like a Cub Scout project to get it on the air when they finally did get it on the air. And then the funny thing about Cleveland, too, is, you know, we always defied all these other, norms, put it that way. Remember what I said about saying, when I said that you were fine in the 50s and 60s if you were a white Protestant male. Well, one of the first people that Channel 5 hires is a Jewish woman in her 50s, Dorothy Foldheim, who was in that role for another
Legendary.
30 years.
Yeah.
And then you had another guy named Gene Carroll. Now, Gene had a radio show called Uncle Jake, and he wanted to bring this to TV. And the third person that they hired at Channel 5 was 7 years old. Her name was Candy Lee, and she was a song and dance kid from his talent school. But when you think you've got a Jewish woman in her 50s, this old guy from radio, and a 7-year-old, that's how we're going to start the TV station. And it worked.
I remember Gene Carroll. That was such a hilarious program. You know, they'd have great garage bands on there, but then somebody twirling a baton and dropping it, and somebody singing The Impossible Dream off key.
Oh, that's true, yeah. I mean, you had members of, like, the Cars, the Pretenders, you had all these other people. The Cowsills made their first appearance there.
No kidding.
And, no, really, yeah, they were out of Canton, and they made their first appearance on the Gene Carroll show.
And you think of Upbeat,
Chrissy
you know.
Hind also was on there.
Yeah.
So.
And the Upbeat show.
Yeah. Well, at any rate, we wanted to get all of these wonderful stories.
Yeah.
And because, we didn't want those lost to history, so we just, kept interviewing. And the funny thing is, some of the people, believe it or not, some of the newer people, I mean, some of the people who were around a lot, more recently, their egos got in the way, so we had to do a little bit of checking because some people had personal mythologies. But thank goodness we were able to do a lot of data triangulation, and we've been trying to, capture as much of Northeast Ohio, popular culture as we can.
Unbelievable. You've been doing a great, great job.
Oh, thank you. That's high praise coming.
Yeah. You know what, I just want to be mentioning this that I'm so grateful to you for is many years ago, and I don't know if you remember, I came across your name as being the radio guy from Cleveland, and I thought it was the longest shot in the world that you wouldn't have known about that. I believe it was WNCR radio contest, the Wild Dream contest with the Pink Floyd. Yeah. And I entered that contest, what year was it, like 70, 71? And,
1970 or 71. They wanted you to describe your wildest dreams, and I think that the prize was the entire Pink Floyd catalog.
Correct.
Which at that time was 3 albums, I think. So.
No, there was actually 6 at the time. It was the 6th album. No, there were quite a few. But the fact is that you were able to locate the recording, I was stunned to be able to listen to my horrendously silly and crazy psychedelic dream at that time.
I thought they were, they were far more intricate and, than we could have imagined. I loved that show. That was wonderful. And WNCR back then was one of the things that we all grew up with, not only here but in other parts of the country. Was great radio. So
absolutely, and they didn't mind
giving the importance of Kicksville. So
yeah, they did not mind giving out a teenage girl's street address at that time.
Well, keep that in mind. That used to be when if you wrote a paper wrote a letter to the paper or even to a comic book.
Yeah.
They would put your full street address in there.
Right.
Those
Exactly.
were the days.
Oh
yes.
Man. Well, tell us some big secret information apart from all of this great stuff that you've told us, including the fact that there's those recordings, which is going to get everyone so hopped up and we're going to enjoy on the show here. But what else about Pete Myers? What exactly was the thing that made him tick? And what was the year span that he was involved in radio in Cleveland specifically? I know he died in October of '68 here in New York, but what was the span of years that he worked?
Well, you know what, he started in he started out really in the 1950s doing radio. When he got to WHKK in Akron, and then later went on to Cleveland and Cleveland radio. He left in 1958. And at that time, keep in mind that it was still, radio had been around for a while. Radio had been around for about 30-some years. TV had only been around for a handful of years. And quite honestly, a lot of his, I guess, myth, the legend or whatever, was just from people remembering their own youth and thinking what it was like back then to grow up listening to Mad Daddy and listening to the forbidden fruit, so to speak. That's the great thing about teenage rebellion. You could say, don't do something, and that makes it all that much more attractive.
Oh, yeah.
So when people would hear, Mad Daddy, they would say, what? What is this? And speaking a language that only kids seem to know, that's another thing that I want to bring up. After World War II, right up to World War II, if you look, if you grew up before World War II, you were a miniature version of your parents. You had the same entertainment, you had the same kind of clothing, everything. After World War II, people came back, kids started getting expendable cash, and then TV hit. Well, they're not going to sit around at home with mom and dad and watch TV. A lot of those golden age of radio shows just switched over to TV. They wanted something that they could actually call their own. Now, the radio stations were being hit because TV was taking a chunk out of their revenue. They have to come up with something new, and let's face it, a little bit cheaper, too. They start playing records. And as a result, the personalities that were selling these records on air, the disc jockeys, became stars just like they're, the people on the record. And you had some people that were, people like Bill Randall. Bill Randall, for those who have never heard of him, defied everything a disc jockey should be. He spoke in a monotone. He spoke in the third person about himself. Bill Randall did this, Bill Randall did that. And he loved talking about Bill Randall. Here's the thing. He could back up every bit of it.
Wow.
I mean, he really did, present Elvis as a rock and roll star for the first time north of the Mason-Dixon line. Wow. He would defy, he said he could make a hit out of anything. And he got pulled into the office one day by the program director. And this is from the era of Mad Daddy and Alan Freed. And they said, look, we know you're picking your records, but, we don't know the kind of stuff, you're really playing. He said, I can make a hit out of anything. I'll prove it. The next record he made a hit out of was the Battle Hymn of the Republic by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. And it was a major hit.
Oh, good Lord. That's the power of radio.
That it came out of. But, we had a different kind of culture. The counterculture, the boomer culture that came out after the baby boom was ready to accept something new and rebellious. And all those things like Mad Magazine, EC Comics, all those things, rock and roll was rebellious. And because our parents were concerned about it, and because they were looking for something to unite people by saying, this terrible rock and roll and all that sort of thing, which they almost pretty much destroyed with, by putting away, Chuck Berry and, Little Richard was driven from rock and roll for a time. Elvis went to the Army. It almost came to an end. But still, you had guys like Pete Myers, Alan Freed, and they're playing all these guys like Andre Williams and All
Absolutely.
those Gut Bucket Blues, it was just wonderful.
And speaking of Andre, when we were speaking with him about the Midwest, about, him being a Chicago guy, but coming out of Detroit with Fortune Records and so on, it was Mad Daddy who he remembered. He remembered him and being called out to Akron to one of the shows that the Mad Daddy was putting on. That's who Andre remembered. And of course, with all of the fantastic records that Mad Daddy was picking out, he wasn't picking out the big records like Alan Freed was. Well, big records in the black community that deserved to come out into the whole world. He did great with that.
Sure.
But Mad Daddy got the obscure stuff. He was really a digger for that stuff and for those people, and gave them a break. Jailbait, Greasy Chicken. It's like, come on now. So his selections were outrageous, and people even today are trying to figure out what some of those records were that Mad Daddy played. They haven't been completely documented yet. So he set a mischievous mystery out there for all of us to kind of try to solve, and you've done such a great job in doing that for us. Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you, Janice.
Well, it's my pleasure, and you know what, the thing was, there was a little bit of pressure involved here, because I thought, when you do a book like this, you have to do really good research, and you got to get it right.
Yes.
Because quite honestly, if you don't, very few people will correct it, and if you don't get it right, you've just changed the historical record.
Oh, yes.
So, in the back of my mind, and this is not an exaggeration, I'm thinking, wow, I'm writing this book. The first draft has to go through Miriam Lina and people like her who knew it.
Well,
who knew the history.
Oh, I'm honored. But listen, one thing I have to tell you, Mike, is your writing style is so incredibly entertaining. I mean, you're factual all the way, but you're not dry. You write with the same enthusiasm that you speak with, and this makes this book something that is a joy to read. It's a page turner, and it's hilarious, wonderful, heartfelt, informative, and fabulous. So we are so proud to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming on.
Anytime.
All right. So listen, tell the people a little bit about when they can expect the book. It's a few months away still.
Yeah, you know what? It's a national publisher, and it's Bear Manor Publishing. And if you go to their website, which is just Bear Manor Publishing, you see the remarkable books that they put out every year. I mean, if you're looking for something like, a classic like, a John Grisham or Baldacci or something like that, well, there's bookstores for that. If you're looking for something about the Bowery Boys, they got 5 different copies.
Ooh, I'm going there.
5 different books.
I love the Bowery Boys.
So we're very pleased to be there.
Yeah.
And actually, it's going to probably come out early next year.
Yeah.
The reason is they did need 6 months to, look over the photos, make sure that I had all the copyrights in line, get all the rights and things like that. By the way, one thing I do want to point out is when the book comes out, which is probably going to be, I'm thinking, in April. I'll have more information. I'll get that to you, obviously. But look at the photos. You're going to be really surprised because some of these photos were forgotten. Pete Myers getting into the plane, getting ready to jump. Pete as Mad Daddy, which is pretty disturbing. Also, Pete on stage at his last appearance. Some of the stuff is pretty remarkable. And we were lucky to actually get it out to people because 50 years from now, who knows what will happen.
Oh, man.
People just think it's just a bunch of photos.
Well, let us know when the book launch occurs. We'll be there, and we'll bring the Jell-O mold, okay?
That sounds great. Maybe we get, and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame might be interested in doing something, and that's right on Lake Erie. I'm just wondering how much green Jell-O we can get there.
Let's contact the Jell-O people. Fantastic.
Well, thank you for having me on. Sure appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, and give my best to Janice. You guys are the best.
Oh, this is on the best show, right?
Take care, buddy.
Janie, Janie, what have you done? Janie, Janie, this isn't fun. We don't know what it's all about, but look out, look out, look out. Janie was a girl who was short on look, but a real wildcat when it came to book. At a party or a hop, she was mighty sad, but she was the queen of the chemistry lab. Janie saw the chemicals on the shelf, and she said, I'll make the date for myself. So
monster with a horrible roar. Now the monster, he was taller than Paul. You should see him walking down the hall, Janie on the left and that thing on the right. Oh man, it was a ghastly sight. Now she talked at the monster how we walk. Then she talked at the monster how we talk. But his first few words were a pleasure to hear. He said, oh good gracious, oh dear. Monster went out for the football team, and when he hit that line, you could hear them scream. But when they hit him, they had nothing to fear. He said, oh good gracious, oh dear. Now the kids told Janie that she had no choice. She had to change his face and voice. So she hit him with a bottle of crazy stuff. And man, she changed him sure enough. Now the monster looks like Rock and Rory, Tab and Ricky too. And he makes some big fat living, singing for me and you. Now his voice is mild and mellow, and you can hear it near and far. And believe me, friends, I'll tell you true, he's the nation's #1 recording star. One day he's gonna slip, I know. And if you listen to your radio, I'm almost certain you're gonna hear. Oh, good gracious.